Please. We're on. Thank you. Right. So item number 1 on the agenda is announcements. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Once outside of the building, please gather outside the Virgin Money building on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door which you entered the room or by the fire exits, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. Could I please remind everyone to turn their mobile phones off or set them to silent? And I'd also remind everyone here that the meeting is currently being live streamed onto the council's YouTube page. Item number 2 is to receive any apologies for absence. I think all members of the committee are present, bar Councillor Singh. Are there any apologies from officers that need to be declared? No? Okay, well, can we have Councillor Singh noted as an apology, please? Item number 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 7th of April 2022. And before I go on to that, I've been informed that Councillor Kandaka wishes to speak on this item, which you are, of course, more than welcome to do, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Couple of things. First, there's a few typos, which I've notified officers about. Probably the most noticeable one is on page 34 about the regeneration of Camp Hill, which has been held up by the landslip. I don't think I quite said recovery work. I can't remember if it was regeneration or what word I used, but it was either regeneration or redevelopment. But the more substantial thing I wanted to mention was the minutes say that a written response will be provided to me about the long-standing issue of 196 to 198 Church Road, Stockingford. And later in that meeting, the Cabinet member decided she wasn't going to provide a written response. That is not minuted, so I think it's useful to minute both the offer to provide a response and then the withdrawal of that offer. And this is an important issue because we've been asking about this for a long while. My wife asked about this, I think it was in February. I raised it in April. And this is a very expensive regeneration, which we don't want to end up like Gresham Road, which is why people are continuously asking, where's the business case and how much is it going to cost? So I hope you've got an answer for me. You did make comments on social media about what I said was a mistruth or something. So I'd be glad to hear what the actual cost is going to be for the refurbishment, and I hope you give me a reply opportunity if you say anything personal about me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kandaka. Well, I do have a statement to read to the committee. On the 15th of June, Councillor Kandaka issued a statement on Twitter stating as follows: the agenda for next week's HHE OSE meeting is out. Just chased up the matter from the minutes of the last meeting. Shockingly, the Cabinet Member for Housing has decided to refuse to provide the written response that is recorded as being offered. Late change of mind, not in minutes. Councillor Kandaka's comment is with reference to the questions to Cabinet section within the minutes. As Chair of the Committee, I wish to make it clear that the Cabinet Member for Housing did indeed provide a response to Councillor Kandaka's comments on the matter relating to 196 to 198 Church Road, Stockingford, and Councillor Colby provided Councillor Kandaka with an answer under item HEH 48, as can be seen in the minutes, and is well documented on the live stream of the video on YouTube. For this reason, I believe that the minutes are true and accurate, and it will be for the committee to ratify the minutes through a vote shortly. With respect to your first part, on the amendments, I do wish to make a very slight amendment to the minutes, where we are under, I think it's page 11 of the minutes. It says, Councillor Kandaka asked if there was a master flood plan. I'd like to change us to is. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Kenner, thank you. So with that amendment, is the committee willing to approve the minutes? Those have been seconded by Councillor Kenner. Any objections to those minutes? I see no objections, though the minutes have been approved. Thank you. I'll sign those off now. those down to Maria, please. Thank you. Item number 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations that members would like to declare that haven't already been printed? Councillor Shires.
Yeah, just to declare that I've now been made a member of the Pinch Pride and Camp Hill board.
Any further declarations? No? Okay, great. So item number 5 is public consultation. I've been made aware that Councillor Kandaka wishes to speak on items 3, 7, 9, 10 and 14. And I've also got a public statement from a Mr. John Ison to read out on item number 10. So next item is... Yes, Councillor Gutteridge.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask if we could move the grounds maintenance contract further up the agenda, please, as one of the directors has a 3-hour drive as soon as the meeting has finished. And out of courtesy, I thought we could let the chap get away a bit earlier if possible. Thank you.
So my intention is I'd like to take the stroke services item first, as we always do with NHS items, and then go on to the Glendale item, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so item number 6 is questions to Cabinet. We have Councillor Golby, the Cabinet Member for Housing, and Councillor Gutteridge, who's the Cabinet Member for Health and Environment with us. I think we'll start with Councillor Golby first. If that... Yeah, okay. Well, let me kick it off, if that's okay, because I do have a question. We've heard a lot on social media about 196 to 198 Church Road in Stockingford. Can you tell us what's going on with that? Can you provide us with an update?
So what you're asking is, can I put it to bed? Yes. Once and for all. And I would actually like to follow up on something that you've said, because I did not refuse to provide you with information. You were entirely wrong to put that out on social media, because I did not, under any... If you can find anywhere where I refuse to give you information that A, isn't already in the public domain, or B, hadn't already been answered through the course of that meeting, then I'll accept that comment, but actually that isn't true. So you were entirely wrong to post that. It's not fair, and you're wrong. So, not that fairness ever comes into it these days with you. So, the decision to purchase these properties on Church Road was made in April 2021, which is a matter of public record. There's 2 different properties that were purchased at the same time, 196 and 198. One was occupied when we went to purchase it. Completion on 198 Church Road was in August in 21. Completion on 196 was in January 22. There were delays, as pointed out by Councillor Kandaka several times, but that's what happens when people are actually occupying properties that you are buying, and there is a chain involved. So, property purchases with people in them never go smoothly. So that property that was delayed was actually occupied, and it was a vendor issue. It wasn't anything to do with us, and it wasn't anything to do with our staff, and it wasn't anything to do with the process. It was the vendor couldn't find anywhere else to live. And we're not going to turf people out on the street, because that's not what we do. So, in August to September, we started putting some designs together. In October, we put a scope of work out to contractors. December 21, we went to contractor procurement. November 21, actually, planning advised that they weren't happy with the proposals that we'd put forward, because we have consulted planning on all the way through this process, and we have been mindful of the fact that we want to make it as quick and painless as possible, so we've been consulting all the people that needed to be consulted at the points where it was expedient to do so. Planning advised that they weren't happy with the 2-storey extension. So we went back to the drawing board on that. January 21, we put tenders out. We got the tenders returned, and they were coming in at around 20% higher than we'd expected, which was actually standard at that point due to inflation and market pressures. So we did some value engineering. We took the 2-storey extension off. We did a redesign in February, and then we did final revision layouts that went to planning. Planning permission was granted on the 6th of June, just gone. So the total purchase price, again, matter of public record, is 635,000. The price for conversion, we're looking at between 650 and 700,000. This will provide 14 self-contained units. 3 are going to be fully accessible. And we're also going to be able to take pets, because you might not know it, but we actually have to pay boarding costs for people who are homeless and have pets. So not only do we have to pay costs for them, to house them, we have to pay for their pets too. So it was thought, actually, let's have a good idea about this and bring pets into the equation. So it will save us paying for pet boarding. We're also going to provide an exercise area so the pets can be taken outside and exercised, because obviously you've got to think of the animal welfare on this as well. It's not just welfare of the humans involved, it's the welfare of their animals too. We also now have to provide 10 EV charging points because of legislation. We've got to put electric vehicle considerations in, so we've got to put 10 EV charging points in. So you should at least be happy about that. We've got to... We had to base this based on other things that had gone before, and there was something that was an alternative to this, which was agreed with the previous portfolio holder, which was to spend 1.2 million to purchase 9 two-bedroom flats from a developer, which was on a development close to the Bullring in my patch, which was interesting to find that out after the fact. And that was to be used for temporary accommodation, but that deal fell through. So this is why the Church Road properties came into scope, because we needed an alternative and we needed something fairly sharpish. So for payback terms, I know that the price is going to be scoffed at, because you just know it's going to happen. But we look at a 50-year payback for viability purposes on these properties. When we actually worked what we could work in the way we could work it, we were looking on this project at not only providing as much support for our residents who are in the most need, but actually making sure that the taxpayer gets good value for money too. So instead of having a 50-year payback for viability, what we've worked on current finances is that when this is up and running, it will save the general fund around £460,000 per year. So the payback terms is actually under 6 years. So we've done a lot of work on this, and it really grinds my gears when I see things on social media and it's being labelled a fiasco. You labelled it a fiasco without any knowledge. There's been a lot of work gone on with this. We've covered as many angles as possible, and it's all been done by some really, really good teamwork. And I stand up here often and I always say the teams are working really well, and I have to say this is an example of that. So we're aiming to get on site July, August time with an approximate 6-month build. Approximate. And I'll caveat the cost and the build times with the fact that the market is volatile. So we're volatile on people in trades, and we're also volatile on materials and costs and labour. So, you know, there is going to be a bit of flexibility in this. I'm not going to stand here and say everything's fixed, but actually it might come down the other way. Who knows? So there are going to be some fluctuations to be expected. That's what I would put out there right now. I also stand by the decision, by the fact that this decision to purchase this property predated me. The decision to purchase was made before I got in post. And that is what was made out last week, at the last meeting. That became very clear because Councillor Watkins actually brought an issue to this chamber about the purchase, which clearly predated me, which is why I said I wasn't going to provide that answer in writing. Now, the other thing that you asked for, the cost, I did ask for that to be sent to you. Now, the fact that it wasn't sent to you is out of my control. It just fell through the gaps. But I did ask. So when you go out there and say I've refused to help, again, you were wrong, because I didn't refuse to help. I asked. And I would just sort of finish this off and just put it out there that maybe if you stopped making such inflammatory comments, it might ease the process of collegiate working, because right about now, it doesn't help at all. So, again, I want to say there's been a lot of good work done by people on this to deliver value for our clients and to deliver value for the taxpayer. And that is how I expect my teams to work. And I'm pleased to say that actually it's worked on this occasion. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to actually get this out there once and for all. And I hope it puts everything to bed, and we'll see how it turns out when the build is done. I'd be happy to invite you all around for a little show and tell. Thank you.
Thank you for that very extensive response, Councillor Golby. And I genuinely don't see what the problem is. And fair play to Councillor Watkins. I mean, I absolutely agree with the decision that he made as cabinet member to sign this off, because it's providing, housing for people in the borough who genuinely need it. So, are there any more questions to Councillor Golby at this stage? Councillor Shires, please do. Yes, come in.
Hi, Councillor Golby. I was just wondering, when you took this on, did you look if there was any other cheaper alternatives that maybe you could back out of that and look at something a little bit cheaper, or something that met the needs more beneficially?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by meet the needs better. This actually will be the best homeless accommodation that we've got in the borough, so it does actually meet every need that we've got. And the property market as it is now, no, there wasn't anything out there. As I mentioned, we looked at, well, predating me, Councillor Watkins actually had confirmed a 1.2 million purchase of 9 properties. So this actually gives us 14 accommodations with not much more money, but actually we've got longer timescales, and we can make it more functional to what we want with the pets and the accommodation outside for the pets, etc., etc. So actually it's better value for money in my eyes.
Any more questions to Councillor Golby? No? Okay, we'll go on to Councillor Gutteridge, who's now in the hot seat. Any questions to Councillor Gutteridge? No? You've escaped, Councillor. So we'll now go on to the next item that I'd like to do, which is the transformation of stroke services. And I'm pleased to welcome Laura Nelson, who is the Director of Operational and Financial Recovery at Coventry and Warwickshire Clinical Commissioning Group. The report is on page 27. Laura, is there anything that you would like to address the committee? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take the paper as read. I think it's been discussed previously, is my understanding. We're now in the phase of delivery. So phase 1 is delivered, and we're working on completion of full transformation by the 1st of September. We have engaged with the public during the consultation period back in 2019. So it's just to update you in terms of where we are in terms of delivering that model, which is the centralisation of acute stroke services, increased rehabilitation beds, and enhanced stroke discharge pathways, which improves patient care in terms of stroke services. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Laura. Are there any questions from the panel to the CCG? No? Okay. Well, I've gone through the report, and I'm content that locally, the CCG and the NHS are doing everything they can to improve stroke services in the borough and the county more generally. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for providing an update to the committee. And we look forward to seeing you in 12 months' time. But it's all been noted, and it's great to get these updates just to make sure that everything is in hand. So thank you very much for your time. And you can stay. You're more than welcome to stay, but it might be a bit boring for the next 2 hours. So thank you for your time. Thank you. Okay. So the next item that I'd like to take is the monitoring of the grounds maintenance contract. and Glendale more specifically. Thank you very much for coming, especially if it's been a 3-hour drive here. Thank you very much. I mean, in future, if it's easier to do these meetings via Zoom or Teams, then you're more than welcome to do that. And I'm sure David can arrange that. But David, you've got a presentation, and then I'll bring in speakers.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'll just briefly go through the report, just to illustrate some points, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Mike from Glendale, and we'll go through his presentation, and if I may take questions after that. Okay. Just in brief overview, obviously the country is now refocusing its COVID response to living with COVID now. So obviously we are moving now with the grounds maintenance contract. Obviously we spent a lot of time dealing with matters relating to that, and most notably in our cemeteries. This year, the graph that you will see below item 4.2, the graph identifies our grass growth rates throughout the area for the year, and it's difficult to see if you've got it as a printed report because it's in black and white. It has an average running from 2016 through to 2020, and then it has the 2020 through to 22 growth rate figures. The point that I would allude to is that the growth rate this year is actually only 4 points lower than it was last year, although it peaked a month earlier. And whilst I will acknowledge that there are areas of concern in the borough where we are working with our grounds maintenance contractor to address those issues, broadly speaking, we have seen considerable improvement in delivery, specifically relating to grass cutting. This continues to reflect the ongoing work that my team have in working with the new management team that has established with Glendale since the last time we spoke. There have been some significant changes, which I know Mike will be able to provide more details on. The work that we are doing currently reflects our change of emphasis and looking at a more strategic approach to managing the grounds maintenance contract. So we're looking at operational frequencies and key areas of concern, and we're trying to concentrate on those. For example, grass area edges and obstacles on site, and addressing those. And that has meant us having some very frank conversations at times with each other. And indeed, even to the point of discussing the, a rectification notice with regards to their systems and their processes. If we are not satisfied that sufficient progress is being made, we have not needed to at this point, but that does not mean that it's not still available to us. I think alongside that, it's also worth pointing out that they've worked very closely with us on several recent civic events, such as the opening of the Peace Podium, the official opening of the refurbished tennis courts and the mountain bike facility in the Miners' Welfare Park, and of course most recently the Sanctuary event and the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And I have to say both of our destination parks in both Riversley Park and the Miners' Welfare Park I thought looked particularly well for those events, and I think they should be congratulated for that. Moving on briefly, looking at our monitoring of performance, the point that I wish to allude to here is that you'll note, if you look at the number of sites that we've been able to monitor, is that is relatively low. And that is because we're currently struggling with the resources in terms of the numbers that we have available to us. We are trying to change that. We've been attempting to recruit an assistant grounds maintenance contract officer now since just into the new year. Unfortunately this time, we've not yet been able to get to the point of shortlisting for interview. We have had a number of responses, but we've not been able to shortlist at this time. We are currently reviewing that in order to look at going back out again, and we're looking at alternatives where we may within our existing headcount. This means that the figures that you see should be treated with a degree of caution because they are obviously based on a very small sample. We are looking to improve that so that we'll be looking at a minimum sample size of approximately 20 going forward. So that's, one a day, basically, we should be looking at in the future. That is our target that we're looking for at the moment. It's for checking the sites to to see whether they are meeting the specification, and if not, looking at what measures need to be put in place to bring that back up to standard. Moving on very briefly, I've provided a brief overview of the numbers of inquiries that we have seen over the period from November 21, when we were last here, through to May. I only have data up until May, which was all I had available at the time the report was being prepared. You can see from that during that period we've had some 1,331 inquiries relating to grounds maintenance matters. The tables that I've provided break that down so that you can see what they relate to, whether it's relating to litter or grass or play equipment. It is worth noting that we have had a significant number relating to trees, which is obviously the subject of another report to come shortly. It breaks it down in teams as to where they've gone, because some of them will come to Glendale. Obviously the firm step system allows inquiries about grounds maintenance matters where it's appropriate in the first instance to be referred to our contractor so that they can make appropriate rescheduling of operations if necessary. But you will see there are still a significant number that are coming through to the Parks team, which is obviously putting some pressure on our available resources. We've also been able to break it down so you can get some indications of the numbers of inquiries and where they're coming within the borough itself. Just to clarify with that, obviously we've broken it down into the inquiries that we've received from residents and from members. Whilst we're not able to identify individual members because of the protocol, it gives you an indication of the numbers of inquiries that we've had from members. It may not necessarily be that it is a member from that ward. We can't go into that level of detail, but it just gives you a flavour, and what we're trying to do is look at where those inquiries are and what they relate to, so that we can focus on grounds maintenance issues in specific areas. So, for example, we may have issues in a particular ward, for example, relating to housing areas, maybe complexes where we've got issues with access to rears of properties, and understanding what that is, whether it's an access issue or whether it's a scheduling issue in terms of machinery. That provides you with a brief overview of the monitoring report and where we are at present. If I may, I'll hand over to Mike, and I will try to make this change when he asks me to. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. And just to clarify, Councillor Conlon, I know you want to speak, but if we can do that after this presentation, and I've also got a public statement as well, which I will do after the presentation, because I think you'll probably want to respond to it. Is it Mike? It's Mike, thank you very much for coming, and please do start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing the item up the agenda, although I would have been perfectly happy to have left at your discretion. I'd like to, David, I'd like to provide you with a short report, following which I'm sure there will be questions, which links back to the report provided previously, and I've broken it into three sections. An update on the transition from the position we were in last year, which we documented and covered at the time. An update on the outcome of that transition process in terms of an overview of performance, and then what we've identified working closely with our council colleagues and the local management team as our objectives for the remainder of this year. In respect of the transition from the challenging position we found ourselves in last year, we now have a new management team that has been embedded for this calendar year thus far, which has involved a new senior general manager, David, to my right, and two new supervisors, an assistant manager and a supervisor, and that followed the departure of the previous management team. And we've also shored up the business support team or administration team with a new position, 1.5 new positions since the last report. All our full-time positions are filled, and the turnover of staff has been relatively low of full-time staff members. Unfortunately, recruitment of fixed-term seasonal operatives to deal with the peak workload during the growing season continues to be a very significant challenge, both locally in this area for certain criteria that we've identified are relatively unique in this area, and we have other hotspots as well across the organisation, but it is a national challenge, and it's a national challenge for us in our sector and in the wider business environment across the country. So we have managed to shore up that shortfall with 7 to 8 operatives from agencies. It's not our ideal approach, but we have found some very good staff through that, some of whom we have offered full-time positions to, and they've taken those up with the organisation. Linked to some of the wider macro problems outlined previously, we continue to have supply chain challenges, but we have secured additional equipment for this year, largely through the good relationships we have nationally with key suppliers, and we've replaced our sidearm flail, which does the bulk of the large-scale hedge cutting, which commences later towards the end of the growing season, and we've brought in additional handheld equipment. There are delays in the supply chain, but we took a decision early this year to increase our stock levels of typical consumable parts, and that has reduced the downtime of equipment thus far. In respect of existing staff and some of the newer staff, and of course those even who are with us only on a temporary basis, we've undertaken thorough induction training around the quality standards, use of equipment, health and safety, as you would expect. We've specifically increased our capacity through training 3 further operatives, permanent operatives, in the use of tractors and the associated implements that they use, which has given us a lot more resilience in that respect. We provided specific bespoke training for team leaders, because they're an absolute key part of the delivery teams, and we've re-emphasised and discussed quality standards and expectations. We've undertaken a review of our system, both Glendale Live, data in FirmStep, and there are other systems that sit behind what we do. There's some more work to do around that, which I'll touch on shortly. And we've done a little bit of community engagement, although I concede it's not been our highest priority thus far. Given the circumstances and difficulties we experienced last year, we prioritised the core delivery aspect of our contract, and therefore some of our community engagement and wider contact visibility we're going to put into stage 2, but nevertheless we did some videos in conjunction with Councillor Gutteridge around hedge cutting and grass cutting to increase the understanding of the activities we undertake. Yes, please, David. Just a very brief overview. In terms of performance, we've undertaken, this is year to date from January, which is we work on calendar year, over 85,000 schedules to date, and along with that, some 30,000, over 30,000 photographs recorded by our teams to evidence the before and after work we've done, and to identify issues, of which we've raised over 400, and they may be things that are within our remit to address, or there may be things beyond our control that we're recording to evidence where we've been unable to, say, for example, fully complete a task. If you look in the top left photograph, that grass area, that grass verge area has been cut, but there are cars parked on it, and inevitably we've had to work around things like that, and that's just one example. If I could just elucidate a little more on the grass growth data that David referred to. This one, fortunately, is in colour. The blue line represents the previous 5-year average from 16 to 20, and the orange line represents last year, which exceeded significantly the previous average, and that exacerbated the challenges we were facing. And you can see in a moment that corresponds with, unfortunately, some of the increased enquiries, contacts that came through the firm step system, which are a barometer of, a general barometer of performance. As David mentioned, the peak this year occurred earlier, about a month earlier. Not quite as high, but still significantly higher than previous years. Fortunately, and it's a testament to some of the preparation work we committed to do and referred to in last year's, in the previous OSP, we were prepared for the start of the season, which meant we were able to broadly cope with the grass growth spike that occurred earlier this season, and we don't expect to have any further spike that will hit that peak. Normally, if there is a second period of growth, it doesn't achieve the peak of the first. Thanks, David. And then linking to that, as I've mentioned, is the firm step data of customer contacts. And I've arranged there the last year data in blue against this year's data. So although it was slightly up in January against last year, since then the numbers have been down reasonably significantly on the previous year, other than a slight increase in May, which probably corresponds to the timing of the peak grass growth thus far this season. And then obviously in June, that's year-to-date information, and clearly illustrates the problems last year in the environment side of things, and we're significantly below that this year. Our aim is to reduce those figures further by enhancing the quality of the service across the borough, but we are pleased, but no complacency, that the data indicates a somewhat improved service this year with work to do. They're about 35% less year to date comparison with last year. Okay. And although you may not be able to see the detail on this, this breaks down those enquiries for this year. And interestingly, over 70% of the ones that have come through to us on firm step, when you look at general cleansing activities and fly tipping and put those together, over 70% of the total contacts from customers relate to that category. And generally speaking, grass inquiries are down to a level of about 6% of the total compared to 35% equivalent year to date this time last year. One of the core matters, in addition to the new management team and the training, the things I've already mentioned, was to address some of the workforce malaise which we were experiencing. And I think I did touch on this last time. Towards the end of last year, the sort of third, fourth quarter, we experienced significant levels of sickness across our workforce, and we put in place some robust measures in line with policies and procedure within the company to address that. And for me, this is very pleasing to see that that's come down significantly this year and is now just about at or under our company target of 3%, and we continue to monitor that closely. And that in turn means more people in work, boots on the ground, undertaking more work against the objectives we have. Just to touch on health and safety, I'm very pleased to say that thus far this year, sorry, I'm slightly superstitious, touch wood, we've had no RIDOR, which are reportable accidents, which typically are of a more serious nature, or involve an absence of the injured person of over 7 days. We've had no minor accidents either this year to date. And then, however, having said that, we've had no safety observations this year, and David and I have spoken about this, and it's something we need to work on significantly. We had 17 last year, which was still a little bit light of what I would expect, and and they generally are an indicator of safety culture. They're not the only indicator, but we need to do some work on making sure that our staff report safety observations appropriately according to what they see out on the ground and what they experience. Moving on to our objectives, I will emphasise again that we appreciate the difficulties, particularly last year, which was disappointing after a reasonable year the year before to some extent. However, we've, and it has been no mean feat and a lot of effort by our local team here, significantly started to turn excuse me, the service around, and it will be our objective to continue building resilience. It's a journey when we've not arrived at the destination yet, and we will seek to deliver continuous improvement in that and work closely with our colleagues in the council and listen and respond to matters that are raised through Firm Step and by other means. We'll continue the investment and development in our people, which also helps to increase the reliability of our assets and manage our supply chain to ensure there are no disruptions from outside factors. We have a lot more work to do on data analysis and enhancement, particularly around the GIS information that we rely upon for the delivery of the service, and that's quite a big project, quite complex. And now that we've dealt with some of the core matters that I've referred to, that this is on our action plan for looking at in the second half of this year. And we also recognise that we made a commitment and now feels the right time to increase our community engagement across the borough in a meaningful way, and we'll be guided and closely by colleagues within the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I have a public statement that I've been asked to read out. So this is from a Mr. John Ison, who is the chairman of the Friends of the Nook, which is in Bedworth. Sorry I can't make it in person. I look after the Nook in Bedworth, and it is an utter disgrace. Glendale failed to turn up. I have always got to complain for them to do the jobs they are supposed to do. They do the jobs and still fail to do them properly. We have a strip opposite my house. They ride on, used to do it. Now he got stopped by Glendale. I was told they will strimmer it. Guess what? They don't. I have been doing some of the jobs myself as I have got fed up on waiting for them. Kids going in the entrances full of nettles, getting stung, not seeing Glendale in months and months. When I walk around the other sites, they are just as bad, an utter disgrace. The only good thing I will say is the people on the dog bins are brilliant. They try with mowing, but not seen them in weeks and weeks now. I will finish... sorry, this isn't... the wording isn't great. I will finish by, they have failed the council big time, and the mess around the borough is down to them, but the council are not blameless. They are not checking the mess Glendale are leaving. They need to get a grip with the open spaces before all go to the dogs. The public deserve better. Come on, Glendale. Would you like to respond to that, either you or David? You don't have to respond. It's just you don't need to respond. It's just so that it's on the record.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that we absolutely will look into this specific issue. Excuse me. I'm not sure if the comments are pertaining entirely to that site or whether it's a general comment of the wider borough, which I have to say I don't entirely recognise if it is a comment on the whole borough. But I'm not happy that there is somebody who's dissatisfied with a particular part of the service in a particular location, and we will absolutely look into that straight away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Kandaka.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for the presentations. I have noticed things are better this year. Clearly that 35% less reporting is sort of reflecting a better state we're in, but obviously there's a lot more to do. I think one of the interesting things for me on the other paperwork is the £65,000 underspend on housing sites, because looking around my ward, the sites that do look the tattiest and residents are moaning about is actually in the housing portfolio, which I think has had even more problems with monitoring. And there's some beds that were taken out and various issues in the past. And we are hopefully going to restart the estate walkabouts very soon. And it would be really great if Glendale could actually at least attend the first round of estate walkabouts so it can pick up issues. So I think that would be a very valuable thing to actually get ourselves in a better place after. Obviously, we've had the years of COVID and we've not had the walkabouts. So I think it'd be really useful to get the housing sites up to a decent spec. And the other area I just want to mention is bins, because it's always a massive thing. And I think there's almost some fatigue in reporting every Monday the bin is overflowing. And it'd be useful if you had some stats on which days of the week you get the most reports about bins, because you almost need more resources just after the weekend by a factor of 2 or 3 in some locations, which are very much, the sand and parks and equivalents, where there's a lot of activity at weekends. It needs to be almost the first bins collected. And it's really useful, this table of reports by ward, because I don't want to be reporting stuff. I want my residents to report stuff and then only chase up things that are not getting done. So it's really useful to see this table and see how all the wards are reacting. I mean, my ward's got about 100 and so from, and about 9 are from councillors, and the vast majority of the public, which is the right thing to do, because we need the public not to ring a councillor, because they want to be direct, not Chinese whispers. So I'm quite pleased by this table. It's quite useful to see how the system is working. And finally, flower beds, this wildflowers on verges and things. I don't know how much we're starting to get into that, because we mow for the county. I don't know if there's discussions between either of the parties about putting some more wildflower, even small areas of wildflower in some of the areas you mow that is more street facing. Thank you, Chair.
David or anyone from Glendale, would you like to make any comments on those points? David?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your feedback on that. Obviously, we try to use that data then to analyse it and identify trends and areas for us to focus on for further improvement. The last point that you made regarding wildflower meadows on highways areas, obviously we have an agency arrangement with the county to undertake highway verge mowing, and I know the county are currently they took a report to their cabinet, I believe, earlier this week regarding adopting a policy regarding highway verges and wildflower maintenance going forwards. Their approach at the moment is to look to other agencies. I would imagine in the main they would be looking to parish councils, who they would want to apply for the rights to be able to produce those and then become responsible for the ongoing maintenance of them. Obviously we don't have parishes here. They have spoken to us about that. At this time, obviously we had a discussion earlier today actually with members of our team regarding our creation of wildflower meadows within our own portfolio of lands. Obviously we have a number of biodiversity offsetting units that we will need to realise on our sites, and currently our focus is on delivering those. The only final thing I would say is that in the creating wildflower meadows on highways areas, we must have regard to the primary issue, which is highway safety, and ensuring that where such installations occur, that visibility displays and such like are maintained. So we take that very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We now come to the part where members can take questions, and I've got quite a few I'd like to start with. I think when we compare the borough to this time 12 months ago, I think everyone has to accept that grass cutting has improved significantly. It has, and you can see that, and it's very clear that Glendale employees are going out of their way to do a good job, and they are doing a good job at grass cutting. My concern is, however, strimming. I believe that remains a big problem within the borough. We have a situation where we are cutting grass, but we're not doing strimming at the same time or within a relatively close period of time. So when people in the borough, they see that grass is being cut, at the same time they are seeing grass that has not been cut around lampposts, around street signs, and it just looks quite messy, actually. Now, I'd say most of the cases that I'm reporting to grounds maintenance through customer services are merely just strimming, and that's it. Are you able to outline, first of all, do you accept that is a problem? And why is there a problem? Because my understanding is that I understand that the strimming is done separately because the equipment that Glendale use, it's got to be used constantly, because if not, it wouldn't be value for money. Fine, but shouldn't it actually be done like a day or two after the grass is being cut?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in a word, it should. The specification states all the sward should be cut, and that is an area that we have been focused on. Obviously, I don't want to draw too many comparisons with last year, because last year was a particular exception. So I don't take that lightly at all. This year we've identified the same point, and that has been the subject of discussions with David as the general manager, and that is a part of the scheduling arrangements that we have within it. As Mike alluded to earlier, 80,000 operations so far this year. We are typically seeing between 18 and 20,000 operations scheduled every month. And what we're identifying is that causes some difficulties in terms of how it's scheduled with the team. So you may have an operation that is scheduled for example, a large ride-on mower, typically weighing a couple of tons. But it's becoming difficult to identify that then requires follow back up with it. David has been working on that with his teams. I mean, he can probably, or Mike can provide you with further detail on that. That's where we focus. It's been brought to their attention. I saw an example only at the beginning of this week, which was in the George Eliot Memorial Gardens. The grass area had all been cut, but we had an area where it needed strimming along the back wall with the McCarthy Stone development. That has been addressed, I've noticed today, which is pleasing. What we want to see is that being rolled out more fully across the entire borough, particularly with a focus on our housing areas, because they are most high profile in terms of the residents will spend significantly more time looking at that environment than necessarily in a more public area. That's where we're focusing at the moment, alongside the other aspects of grounds maintenance, such as shrub beds and such like. So we're looking at weed growth in and around shrub beds as well. I don't know whether, Mike, you want to come back on how you're working with your teams on that.
I suppose before you do, Mike, I accept what you're saying, but is there a reason why basically the strimming crews aren't just following the mowing crews? If you understand what I'm saying. I'm not a specialist in this, I accept, but I in my view, it should be all done so that it's all... Mike, do you want to come in? I think you've got an answer.
Thank you. Yeah, we recognise that the strimming is a problem. We're looking to increase the resources we've got deployed on that. So some of the shortage, I said, we've had to top up with agency staff this year. That's presented a problem. And part of this, and what we're doing to address it, is if we can improve the GIS, the electronic data of the sites, because we've got a lot of sites, about 50-50 between polygons, which clearly define the area, and points that give you the general location of the work to be done. When we've lost some of our core staff, we lose some of that knowledge, which isn't really acceptable, because in this day and age it shouldn't rely on it being in an individual's head. But if some of the delineation is not absolutely clearly identified, then the strimming operations are slower than we would expect them to be. So we're going to increase the resource. And if I may say, the second thing in sites where it's appropriate is David and I agreed a programme of increased spraying of herbicides to obstacle areas earlier in the year, which makes a tremendous difference in terms of being able to keep on top of those. So increasing resource, more targeted, and improved data. So we recognise that the matter being raised, and we hope to be able to make significant inroads to that as we go through the season. Sorry, I would just make the final point is, yeah, I mean, the large-scale mowers operate at something like 30 to 50 times the productivity square metre per hour, minute, whichever way you care to measure it, and it's extremely difficult to undertake the backup mowing, the strimming, in line with that, but we will endeavour to have the gap between the large area mowing and the backup through the measures I've said, the increased resource and the spraying shortened significantly from where it is at the moment.
Okay, great. David, war memorials in the borough, are they covered within the grounds maintenance specification? Do parks look after those?
Where they are located on MBBC land, yes, we would. Depending what the operation is. If it's, take for example, the War Memorial in Riversley Park, for example, yes, that falls within the park, it's MBBC. We maintain the site in accordance with the grounds maintenance contract. And I believe you undertake the removal of wreaths at appropriate points in time. But in terms of the maintenance of the actual memorial itself, that is not a grounds maintenance function.
Okay, I'd be grateful if we can find out who is responsible for basically cleaning war memorials on the Borough Council, unless Councillor Gutteridge has the answer. Go on, Councillor.
Talking possibly at turn, I would think it would be either the British Legion or whoever memorial it is, as David said.
David, would it be possible to find out and get back to the committee on who is responsible for the main memorial in Nuneaton and in Bedworth? Because I've had quite a few people contact me recently about the state of the war memorial in Bedworth. And I just thought it would be parks who would maintain those, but obviously not. But I'd be grateful if you could get back to the committee with an answer on that. I wanted to raise a point about rectification notices. We've got quite a few new members of the committee. Could you basically outline what is a rectification notice, at what stage during the process do you issue them, and what is the threshold that needs to be met in order to issue one?
In the previous contract, the approach that was taken was to issue rectification notices for individual failures in performance. What became apparent from that was that, in effect, you came to write the contractor's job tickets. Because the contractor will need to respond, they will move resources from their scheduled operations in order to address that. So with the new contract, we looked at it in a more strategic way. So what we are saying now is that in terms of scheduling operations, that is a matter for the contractor. The contractor is responsible for scheduling the operations and ensuring that they are completed to schedule. What we will look at is we're looking at the performance on the ground and how that relates to their systems and processes. So have they got sufficient resources? Have they got it sufficiently well scheduled? are there issues with the systems and processes? Obviously, we have a lot of ongoing dialogue with them, which is at an informal level. It's formal, but it's in contract terms. It's considered to be informal. So we will discuss those matters with them. If we are of the view that that is not being treated with sufficient regard, we will obviously reach the point where we will go, we will need to do this more formally. As I said earlier in my presentation, it was only recently that we were discussing with David the likelihood that we would be issuing a rectification notice in respect of systems and processes in relation to the trimming of obstacles, fences, wall lines, etc. What we have then observed is that there has been some improvement. So although that is still there, we have not issued it at this time because we are conscious that we need to allow the contractor to concentrate on delivering the schedule. And the schedule is key. If you can make the schedule work and you stick to the schedule, then the grounds maintenance will meet the specification. The moment you depart from that, and we're not in a position such as you may find in an industrial setting where it's far more controlled. It's far, you know, we have considerable environmental factors that impact this. You know, we've recently had considerable rainfall. If it happens on the day, that makes a considerable impact on the efficiency of the machinery and the amount of work that you can complete that may have been scheduled that day. That means you need to reschedule operations going forwards. That is for the contractor to manage. They need to manage those schedules. If those schedules slip, we bring it to their attention. If they continue to slip, we would rectify against their systems and processes in doing so. But if we start insisting that they move, go here, go there, the schedule will fail. And at that point, productivity drops, and then we see it becomes a spiral, and it will continue to drop down. Now, I appreciate that that may mean that for some individuals, it may seem that you're not dealing with my bit, the bit that I'm looking at. And I appreciate that is very important to you if it's outside of your house or is where you go to work. Each cycle of grass cutting, we are approaching some 3.1 million square metres. So it is inevitable that we will not achieve 100% on all occasions. What we are trying to do is ensure that we get as close to that as we can, as I said, allowing for the environmental factors that will interfere at times.
Yeah, okay, right, that's good. You mentioned 20 sites that will be used to basically monitor that Glendale is following the contract in effect. To confirm, that's 20 sites a month, and those will be picked completely randomly.
That is our intention, yes. As I said in the report, our resources, the available resources we have currently is making that problematic. We're trying to recruit to that post. Our aim is that. It works with great, it's a site a day in working week terms. It's random selections. We will look at, not entirely random, but we will look with that within our hierarchy of sites. So obviously we have, within our parks team, we have a destination park, a community park, a local park and an incidental space. Obviously we will look to our destination parks and community parks because we believe those are the ones most heavily used by the public.
And the final question from me, I'm going to bring this up now, although it is in the integrated performance report on page 50, contract monitoring. Can you just explain what is the difference between formal areas and informal areas?
In crude terms, a formal area would be what most people would consider to be a park or a recreation ground. you would typically see a grass site that was on a 16-cut annual schedule. You may have football pitches and formal sports facilities on those. An example would be, for example, Riversley Park would be considered a formal site. An informal site is what previously we used to know as a natural environment area, such as wildlife sites. So, for example, Windmill Hill or indeed the Nook, as we heard from earlier on. The way that the bills of quantity were originally put together by my predecessors obviously results in a different series of operations depending on what their status is. And that was what I alluded to in the report, is that on an informal site, there are typically only 4 scheduled operations. If you have all 4 operations scheduled in the same month, which is not typical, then obviously if you've not completed one of them, you're down to 75% straight away. But if you're on a month where there's only one of those operations scheduled, you either pass or you fail. And in statistical terms, that has a major impact then on the, and that is something that Steve Gore and myself have been looking at, because we want to try and make that more reflective and more meaningful. I don't think at the moment it provides us with anything usable. It needs addressing. It needs changing.
I think we've got to look at that long term. I think we've probably got to do away with the days of formal, informal. I think perhaps maybe split it up. Maybe if we could have a local wildlife site section to monitor it, that would be good. Because obviously on informal areas, we're only hitting 49%, which I presume is because we're struggling to recruit a contract enforcement officer. And I hope that when we do finally appoint, that figure's going to increase, which I'm sure it will. Probably heard enough from me for one night. Any more questions, Councillor Shires?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I'm one of the ward councillors for Camp Hill, and one of them, there's a lot of issues actually with regards green spaces, walk-throughs, cut-throughs from the schools where all the shrubbery's just allowed to grow over the weeds, etc. But in particular, along Queen Elizabeth Road, there are some embankments for houses that are just not touched. And when Glendale have been asked, why aren't you cutting these back? The response is, we don't have the right equipment. So Camp Hill, I don't know if you've been there, but it's obviously on a hill. And there are lots of areas where we've got a green space and it's on an angle and they are not being dealt with at all. Can you give us some reason what that is and why you haven't got the equipment?
Mike, I think that's one for you, possibly. Or David, yeah.
I'll let Mike come back in a moment. Obviously, this is a matter that normally we would deal with through the firm step system, and I know we've spoken about that. In relation to that specific area, there's a number of areas which Glendale won't cut at the moment because it's not actually in the contract, which is on the basis that the records that we hold, that we use, show that the land is not in MBBC ownership. I know there is some discussion about that, and that is currently with our legal team to establish ownership. Obviously, we do not typically engage in maintaining land that is not in our ownership at taxpayers' expense. In relation to access to vegetation, typically for the grounds maintenance equipment that we're using, you are looking at a gradient of no more than 1 in 6 as a maximum before you can't maintain that, even with handheld equipment, in a manner that is safe in the workplace. I'll let Mike come back in to speak about that in a bit more detail, but obviously there are health and safety implications there.
The actual areas that I'm talking about aren't actually new. So this is a part of Queen Elizabeth Road that has been there since Camp Hill was built. So it's opposite Willow Road. So you've basically got the path and then you've got an embankment, and then you've got the properties at the top. Some steps were put in by the council for residents, but the shrubs, the thorns are just allowed to grow over everywhere. So I've been up there today and I've sent pictures through, and all that's been sent back from Glendale when they come out is we haven't got the equipment to do this.
If you don't mind, I apologise. I'm not intimately familiar with the location you refer to, but I will visit it with David. I think we can find time to go there tomorrow. Well, then we'll look into what you say. I'm not sure who's quoting that we haven't got the equipment. It's not, if you like, an official comment from us, and I can assure you that we have either based here in our local depot or available to us in the wider area in the Midlands, the equipment required to do any and all maintenance. And there is always the odd exception where we do need something that's highly specialised, that we can get hold of it if we need to. But could we look into the specifics of it and then advise, assuming it is under NBBC ownership, which is the first question, then we will come back to you on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And if you want to do a site visit, I'm more than happy as well to come out with you, because there are actually lots of areas on Camp Hill that I want to pick up, but we can do that separately. Thank you.
Okay. If I just come back onto what Councillor Shires has said, because obviously you alluded to the fact that there might be some sites in Camp Hill that I presume are not adopted by the council, which is why we can't carry out grounds maintenance work. Fair enough, and those are the rules. But the Town and Country Planning Act does state under section 215 that a local authority has a statutory duty to issue notices to private landowners who are not keeping their land in a decent condition. So with respect to the land that Councillor Shires is saying in Camp Hill, can the Parks Department look at issuing a section 215 notice?
The Parks Department can't, because it's a planning matter. Section 215 notices would be served by our planning team. So they would be issued, and that would go through their enforcement team. It's not a matter that the Parks and Green Space team engage in directly. The closest involvement we have had is that in the past, where the planning department have issued a 215 notice, usually on a private residence, is they might approach us to ask our contractor to provide them with a quote, but we do not get involved in actually issuing those formally ourselves.
Right. Any more questions? Councillor Cooper.
I'm also a ward councillor in Camp Hill. There's a piece of land between Brights Road and Long Kiln Road, which is a triangular piece of land, and it's overgrown with dock leaves and grass. I've complained about it. I've been pushed round in a circle from Scanlon's back to the council, to Barrett's, back to the council. Nobody seems to take responsibility for that, but Glendale have been and mowed round the edge. Now, they took a machine up there to do that, but they just mowed round the edge and nothing else. Somebody's got to take responsibility for that piece of land. Thank you.
Is this piece of land, is it a private piece of land, David? Or is it owned by a housing developer who hasn't adopted it to the council?
The piece of land that we're referring to, and I appreciate that we're moving beyond the report here, and the piece of land that is being referred to is one which, according to the records that we currently hold, is not in NBBC ownership. As such, that matter has been referred to our legal team to establish, and we await their response, which is outstanding at this time. I will chase that up following this meeting. But until that is clarified, obviously we wouldn't engage further. I know we undertake some minimal maintenance around the edge on highway safety grounds because it is quite close to the existing carriageway, and we have an element within our existing grounds maintenance contract to do that. There are issues around the maintenance of that piece of space, even should it eventually come to the Borough Council for ongoing maintenance, which we will need to address at a time with our contractor.
So what it sounds like is that the legal department is conducting a search with the land registry to find out who owns the land. And when we establish who owns the land, at that point, I think we've got to bring in Ashley Baldwin to get a Section 215 notice issued.
I do believe that we own the land, but it's unadopted. But somebody's got to take responsibility for it.
Well, look, when a land registry search is done, then we'll find out who owns it. And if it is...
Chris Wilson said that we actually own the land.
Okay, well, I'm happy to pick it up with you outside of the meeting. Are there any further questions? I think Councillor Harbison, you was next. Councillor Harbison.
Thank you, Chair. Brief statement, then a question. Feedback I've been getting on the councillor for Wenbrook, one of them. You'll like this one. Brilliant. The upturn in the cutting, everything, absolutely brilliant. My residents are very happy. Apart from a few, the only complaints I've had are people are moaning about the lack of wild spaces within my ward, and I wondered if you had any feedback on that, if there were any plans to increase the amount of wild spaces. I could give you some examples specifically if you want, but there's no point right now. So my question just would be, do we have any kind of strategy regarding wild spaces, and if so, where do I get hold of it? Thank you, Chair.
David, are there any strategies that we're working on at the moment? Could you respond on that, David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are currently in the process of rewriting the current open space strategy. The new one will be a green space strategy. We have consultants who are working with us on that. They've just finished their site visits. They undertook those recently, and they're now analysing the data sets that we've provided them along with their own observations in order to provide us with a comprehensive data set to inform that developing strategy. That will look to identify the mix of land that we have across the entire borough, how it is used. Even we will start looking even at levels at where it sits in terms of ownership. There are areas that we maintain that are HRA land, for example, which have not been used for development at this time, but they still remain as HRA land. So there's limits on what we can do to develop those. So yes, we will look at that. We also have, obviously through planning gain, we have a number of biodiversity offsetting 106s in place, and we will be looking at how we address those going forward. I will need to see the detail to understand where they fit in terms of where we deliver those. That is emerging as we prepare the strategy. So it's a case of watch this space. We should be in a position to be coming back probably late spring next year. Obviously, we would look to bring this to yourselves first before we go forwards. Thank you.
Councillor Harbison, you've got a follow-up question.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very brief one. So in terms of public getting my residents involved with all this, is there any specific plan for consultancies, etc.? I might have missed it, but if there is there any way that you can fill me in with that so I can get my residents on board and we can try and make everyone happy? Thank you.
David, if you could just write to Councillor Harbison outlining the consultation process, which I'm sure there will be one of some sort, because you would have to, wouldn't you, with a new strategy? That would be great. Councillor Cape.
Is it on? Okay. Apologies if it's not exactly the right forum for asking, but I'm tying together the letter of complaint that you had from Bedworth, the 40% performance rate on informal areas, as you designated in your question. A couple of the councillors from Camp Hill who are talking about cut-throughs and access routes. There are many public footpaths that I've personally walked along, which are quite impassable. You mentioned scheduling, and I had a look at the schedule. Woody cut back in February, summer cut back in July, and then another cut back later in the year. You mentioned the growth rates of grassed areas, which I have to admit you're doing a greater job on. I've noticed a difference as well. But on these informal areas, there are certain areas that I just can't walk up. because there are just nettles, overhanging branches, etc. Does the council have a responsibility for for public footpaths or not?
I think I know the answer, but David, you can come in.
Thank you, Councillor. Where it is on land in MBBC ownership, yes. And where it's on informal sites, and I know we've discussed with one of my colleagues recently about cutbacks along footways, and that matter is being addressed, it's in progress. Where it's on the public footpath network, no. They are public rights of way, which is a county council responsibility, but their role is to maintain the right of way. They typically will be crossing private land. So in terms of keeping them clear, that is the landowner's responsibility. And if action needed to be taken, then that would be through the county council. So if you've got specific areas on rights of way that you have concerns about, is probably Fix My Street is your best port of call, and that will redirect it to their rights of way team.
Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. So I'll keep this as concise as possible. Again, what a difference it's been compared to last year, and I think all teams need to actually look at that and say, you know, there has been great improvement. I've certainly got a lot of less response. I've had to respond less to complaints about losing dogs in grass this year. And yeah, there will always be a few areas missed, but when I have brought it up through customer services, the teams have been very respondent and rectified it, or it was already on the schedule for the next few days. But I do have some questions in regards to some of the data we saw earlier. In regards to, we had, I think it was 80,000 schedules so far, and there was only, I think it was between 20 and 30,000 photos taken. So that's a discrepancy there in my mind. I'm sure there's probably a reason, but is there a way to keep it higher, of course, because ideally I'd expect 1-to-1, so that if a complaint comes forward, you can go, this is what we did. One more thing is in regards to Glendale wanting to do further data, etc. Might it be possible to have a sort of heat map in regards to the hotspots of complaints so we can physically see where the major complaints are, or if you wanted to spread that to grass growth in certain areas, however that's possible. But that is something that I think would be quite beneficial both to officers or members for us to have a look at as well. Thank you.
I think a heat map would actually be very good, and maybe that could be, if you can do it. I don't know if the system that you've got might just sort of automatically generate it, but if you could potentially include that within the performance reports, that would be good. Are you able to come in?
Excuse me, if I take the last point first, unfortunately, data requires a lot of crunching to produce what you want out of it, but we certainly could look at producing a heat map with the data available to ourselves, and we'll work with our council colleagues to look at joining up in producing something that you find useful. So, yes. With the photographs, I would say first that we do encourage staff to take before and after photos of each operation they undertake, and that isn't always the case. It's sort of a constant process of checking, monitoring and reminding. That said, a schedule is a location where we undertake an activity. So sometimes we have two activities at a location at the same time, or we have a location, an example would be in a particular geographical area, there might be 4 pieces of grass. Each of those represents a schedule. So if we can, and we do take photographs that capture more than one piece of grass, to use that example. So it's unlikely it will ever be at a 1-to-1, but I accept the point, and believe me, we are monitoring that with our staff and seeking to increase it where we identify a shortfall.
Are there any further questions to no? Okay. Oh, Councillor Wright, your maiden speech.
Yeah, right. Do Glendale have a specific policy as to what time of day you use noisy equipment.
Yes. Specifically, us as a policy ourselves, no. There is a sort of overarching umbrella of available working hours. We do seek to, and have this year for the first time in some time, and this is across the organisation, we've increased our working hours in the summer to try and address the fact that more work is required in the summer. We have also shifted, although not wholly, based on available equipment in the market, to battery-held equipment, which is not silent, but it is typically quieter than the two-stroke petrol-engined equipment that we also use, which we're seeking to phase out. It's difficult to refine the operation on a location-by-location basis. If there was somewhere that was extremely sensitive, that we could see if we could rearrange our programming, our work program system to try and address when we visit that, or the timing of when we visit that site. We do encourage staff to be as respectful as possible, but unfortunately in the summer, making available daylight or maximising available daylight and working hours, we start out typically 7 o'clock this time of year. Probably finish operating on site around 3:30. I say we start at 7 o'clock, but that's when the staff are deployed from the depot premises, so they're not actually engaged meaningfully in undertaking work with powered equipment until probably 7:30 onwards, depending on how far they've had to travel.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. You are allowed to leave now. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to take the item now on empty properties, and we have a presentation from a Wendy Rollinson, who is appearing via Teams, I hope.
I'm here.
Wendy, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's great. Are you able to present your report to the committee?
I am, yes, yeah. I mean, I haven't got a presentation as such, but I'll talk through the report if that's okay. So, empty properties, obviously the scourge across the country, and obviously becomes much higher in profile at times when we've got a shortage generally of housing for people to live in. At the minute, our council, well, from the end of April, our council tax data showed that we had 1,544 empty properties in the borough. Lots of reasons for that number. 471 are exempt from paying council tax, so there are specific reasons why they're taken out of paying council tax. And a lot of that is written in legislation. There's not much we can do about that. The most common reason for people being exempt is that the person who owns it has died, and probate hasn't been sorted out, so they're just sat there, and that is a big problem for us in our long-term empties in particular. So we've got 479 properties that have been empty for less than a year. We don't really need to do much with those because there is always a churn in the housing market. They might be empty for being refurbished or what have you. So we tend to just write to those once, telling them, offering them advice on how they can bring the property back into use and try and find out why it's empty in the first instance. So you'll see from figure 1 that most of the properties on our 1,544 have been empty for less than a year. We've got a few sticking problems with properties. We've got 3 that have been empty for 27 years, 1 26, and then that gradually goes up until you get to the 1 year at 570. We did notice in 2015-16 there was a huge drop in the number of empty properties, but that was around a time when there was lots of government funding. I don't think that we took up any of that funding, but certainly the higher profile and the general raising of awareness probably had an impact on bringing some empty properties back into use. However, now they're sort of back to where they were 10 years ago, and that figure seems to be sticking for a while. What we have seen is an increase in second homes, and I think there's been something in the media about that this week. And looking at the national picture, a lot of people in London don't want to stay in London all the time, so there's a lot of Londoners that are buying properties outside of that conurbation. And that might be one reason why we're getting second homes in Nuneaton and Bedworth, because the properties are relatively cheap compared to what they are paying in London. So staffing wise, we've recently appointed a new empty properties officer who's extremely enthusiastic. I'm finding that I'm running behind her most of the time instead of in front. She's now reviewing all of the data, particularly looking at the ones that have been empty for 10 years or more. We've decided to focus on those for a while, look at them case by case, find out why they're not being brought back into use. If it's a legal reason, there are some properties that are just exempt from all of the action that we need to take, that we can take. So we're parking those. If there's nothing we can do, there's nothing we can do, and we're going to concentrate on the few where we think that we can bring them back into use. So most of the common barriers relate to people dying, really, and perhaps not having a will. Often the homeowner is an elderly person who leaves the property to another elderly person who probably hasn't got the wherewithal to sort out the land registry details and get the probate sorted. So and we do come across some very vulnerable elderly people who really don't know where to turn. It's too big a job for them to sort out the work that needs doing on the house. If it's not, if the property's not registered with the land registry, that's a bit of a legal minefield. And then they've got to get probate, which is costly, and often they haven't got the money to lay that out up front. We've got a couple of properties where the owner lives abroad and just is not bothering to deal with them. And like I say, the extensive work on some of these properties makes it prohibitive for some people to tackle. So we've got quite a few options available to us. We can serve some statutory notices under the Housing Act, so we can go in and do a hazard assessment. If there are hazards there, then actually we have got duty then to try and remove those hazards. We would have to serve that notice on the owner. So again, we're often dealing with vulnerable people, and probably that isn't the right way to go. We have got a couple of properties now that we are considering an enforced sale. This is where we've done work on the property. For example, somebody served a 215 notice that I heard you talking about earlier. We've gone in and cleaned it up, and we put a charge on the property. That money is then owed to us. And once it gets to a level, a reasonable level, we wouldn't enforce a sale if they only owed us £20 on a £100,000 house. So when we've got the right level of debt owed to the council, then we can enforce a sale. And like I say, we've got two properties that we're considering that with already. Compulsory purchase is very difficult. It has to go to the Secretary of State, and I have worked in a local authority where they have compulsory purchased a property because it was derelict, and it was 5 lever arch files that went to the Secretary of State to argue the case. So that is it's definitely an option that we would consider, but it's never going to be a quick fix. And then we've got the Section 215s and the empty dwelling management orders, which sound quite promising because they do provide us then with an accommodation that we can use and pay the take any money back from the rent that we've spent on the property to bring it back up to a usable position. But a lot of properties are exempt from that. A lot of the long-term properties are exempt from us taking that action. So we're having to look for other options, but that's certainly one that we are looking at. And we would have to get somebody to manage the property for us. So I think I've had initial contact with Jane about this and how we can move that forward. So basically, the current offer to owners is mainly advice and assistance or a loan of up to £10,000. We can only give advice. We can't physically help people. So it would be good if we could walk alongside a property owner who's having difficulty dealing with selling a house or doing the work, if somebody could do that. But that's not our role. Like I say, we do give out quite a few loans, and £384,000 worth since 2014. They're gradually being paid back. That goes back into our budget for us to loan out again. So in terms of our future work, we've been approached by a local estate agent who would like us to promote their service. So we would put them in touch with an empty property owner or the other way around, and they could discuss how the agent can help them bring that property back into use by absolutely taking the property off them virtually and managing it themselves. But they have to be properties that are livable in, which our long-term empties aren't. We've a new company started up, Lendology, which specifically lend money to empty property owners. We've only just made contact with them just to make sure that we do our proper due diligence before we recommend that to people. We are going to review the existing loan provision, have a look to see if there's any other financial support that we might be able to give landlords to bring properties back into use. But you know, money's tight, we know that, and it's just one of the pressures in the services. So I don't think there's much else I can say. Do you want to add anything, Paul?
No, I mean, sorry, I'm Paul Coopy, Head of Home Environment Services. So, and Wendy's my private sector housing manager, so she's on an interim basis because again we've got difficulty recruiting. We did have a leasing scheme. We trialled a leasing scheme back a number of years ago, and it caused us all sorts of problems, and that's why we're a bit tentative at the moment about leasing properties or doing empty property management orders. We need a proper scheme in place with the resources to allow that to happen. And some of the examples that spring to mind is when there's repairs, it's in a private property, so the council housing repair team do not have that variety of bathrooms to repair the bathroom with, and etc. So there's all sorts of problems because it's managing in the private sector and not in the social sector. So we'd have to do research into the schemes to see what is actually viable and the resources necessary to do it. So, but yeah.
Thank you very much, Wendy and Paul, for your report. Councillor Kandaka, you wish to speak on this item? If you could keep the video on, because they will be taking questions if possible. Thank you. Councillor Kandaka.
Thank you. I've spoken about empty homes years, probably for a decade. I've been a councillor. Really important subject because a lot of people can't afford a brand new home, and a lot of these 1,700 will get recycled into the housing system, and it's the ones that aren't getting recycled that actually need a little nudge. I think when we're doing really well and we had the resources to have empty home officers, we got about 40 extra a year coming back into use, and that's about 10% of our innate housing need. You know, we need around 400 a year just to cope with our growing population. So this is really important and really useful work. It used to be funded partly effectively by us getting some new homes bonus for bringing empties back into use. I don't know if that benefit is still with us, but I can't emphasise enough what a valuable asset these homes are and how we need to get them recycled into use again, particularly because they provide housing at a lower price point than brand new homes. And not everyone in the borough is going to be wealthy and going for the new homes. This source of 40 extra or whatever, empty homes being converted back into use is really, really important. And I do hope we put as much resources as we can. And one thing we quite often do is we get developers come saying, you need to build 25% affordable housing. And I say, oh, we can't afford to do that. And actually, maybe one thing we should look at a bit is actually getting small developers who can't viably actually build affordable housing as part of their thing, actually funding empty homes getting back into use, because it's still serving that need. Thank you, Chair.
Wendy or Paul, are you able to address some of those points, please?
If I answer first, Wendy, I'd say at this point in time we're at a bit of a reset because we have had vacant posts in the team for some for 2 years, some for 1 year. So we're resetting at the moment and trying to re-establish the team. I agree with what was just said in that these homes are extremely valuable. And I think Jane Grant will agree with me that we need to bring some of these back into use to meet her needs as well for her teams and the residents. So yes, I think we need to reset, continue to reset and establish improved services with a new team, basically.
Yeah, I reiterate what Paul says. Really, the team has been well, it was decimated over 12 months ago, so we're rebuilding the statutory functions as well as the empty properties work. But I'm quite positive about our new empty properties officer. Occasionally you get someone that comes in front of you that you think absolutely they've got their heart in it, and she definitely has, and she wants to do well. So I think we will see good things here. But some things are out of her control. If the legislation says we can't do anything, then we can't do anything. There's very, there's very little we can do. So all we can do really, and I've tasked her with, is work through the ones that are 10 years or more, because they're the ones that are likely to be causing problems for neighbours and what have you. And let's try and button down exactly what the issues are that's stopping these people applying, and then looking for a wide range of solutions. We might have to invent a couple to bring them back into use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's first of all, it's great news that we've managed to appoint a new empty homes officer, and I wish her all the best at the authority. I think when we look at the table in the report and we see that just under 1,000 properties, or just over 1,000, have been empty for less than 12 months. I think people have to accept that there are substantial probate and legal reasons as to why homes are empty. Some families may wish to contest a will, and that leads to legal problems. Just 3 questions I want to make. First of all, we had a situation a number of years back where the council decided to change the warden scheme in the assisted living complexes. A lot of our wardens actually had housing. Have all those houses now been put into the housing stock, and are they filled with families? Second point, in terms of, you've mentioned about some property owners living abroad not wanting to do anything with properties in the borough. I'm not too sure if NABSAL, if you've been able to make an approach to them to ask if NABSAL might just want to buy the property off them. I'm not too sure if that's been done, but it might be an area to explore. And the final point, Wendy, you mentioned the empty homes premium. I'd be interested in knowing, do we have any substantial cases where we have people who are, significantly in arrears with the empty homes premium? Thank you.
If I take 1 and 2, in terms of the sheltered housing stock, independent living stock, then I can't answer that one, but I'll have to get back to you with that if that's okay. Unless Jane knows about that directly. Yeah. In terms of NABCEL, NABCEL's definitely on the agenda to approach and discuss exactly what they could do for us. So definitely, if we take over properties through leasing or management orders, then we'll need someone to manage those for us. And then Wendy, if you can take the third comment about the empty homes premium.
Yeah, I understand that the empty homes bonus is that what you're referring to, that the council gets for every property it brings back into use?
Yeah, so I mean that. Yes, that's it.
Yes, yeah. I understand it is still the case that we do get that. I'm not sure how much it's worth nowadays because the scheme's changed quite a bit, but it's certainly it's a big incentive for us to get the property back into use because it will bring us income. And of course, some of these properties are very high rated properties as well, so we're losing out on quite a bit of council tax. So there is a financial incentive to bring them back into use. Has that answered your question?
Well, first of all, Jane Grant is going to come in on the sheltered housing point, but it's probably not one to answer now. But if the committee could be provided with some information on if we have anyone who is in arrears with their empty homes.
Sorry, I missed that bit of your question. Absolutely, there are people that owe a substantial amount of council tax. And I think the Empty Properties Officer has been working with the Council Tax Department to see if we can have a joint approach to bringing them back into use and get the council tax back.
Yeah, but there'd be a difference, won't there, between people who are just on council tax and then people who are paying council tax plus the empty homes bonus. Am I right in saying that?
Oh, you think the premium, do you mean?
Yes, the empty homes premium, that's it, yes.
Yes, sorry. Cross purposes there. Yes. I mean, there are, that's something that we need to check. We also need to look at whether these exemptions are still in force. That's another task that the Empty Properties Office is looking at. But we do have one empty property owner that owes a significant amount of money over several homes that we're trying to deal with at the minute.
So that's why I was asking, because I did have an officer confidentially inform me of that specific case. Perhaps if I could be given some more information on what's being done to recuperate that, that would be great. Jane, do you want to come in on sheltered housing, please? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Is that right? So when we moved away from the traditional warden schemes and we introduced the independent living schemes, we looked at the properties that wardens were occupying. So some of them were houses, you're quite right, some of them were flats that formed part of the scheme. So those that could be utilised for families, they weren't in the middle of an existing ILU scheme, so that wouldn't have been appropriate to put families with children in, So some of those were converted to create additional independent living units to fit in with the scheme. Others that were sort of on the outskirts of the schemes stood alone really, were used for, we were able to allocate to families. And correct me if I'm wrong, and Councillor Golbin might know this better than I do, I think we've only got one scheme where we've still got a house that we're looking to convert into 2 flats because it's right in the middle of the complex. We couldn't put, a family with children in there, but I will get that information for definite. But yes, they've all been put to use. They're not standing empty for no reason.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Kenner, you want to come in?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Wendy and Paul, for the report and the presentation. It sounds like there's actually quite a lot of positive news coming out of the housing team at the moment surrounding empty houses. I'm particularly pleased to hear about the full-time technical officer to focus on this issue. I believe this was only part-time in the past, so it's quite welcome to hear that there's quite a lot of focus going into this at the moment. And as well, I'm happy to hear that the housing policy is being, the empty housing policy is being reviewed as well. So it just shows again the planning for the future by the housing team. And from the looks of things, we're already starting to see some results on this. If you just go by the council tax data alone from was it April this year compared to last year, it looks like there's already over 10% reduction in the number. We're down at 175 compared to last year's data on this year's council tax information. And I'm sure councillors, both present and recently gone home, would agree that we do have a fantastic team in the housing department led by Councillor Galby. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing more from you in the future. Thank you.
That's great. Councillor Cape?
Yeah, thank you. As a new councillor, I found it very interesting to read your information. The only thing, as an observation, I would make is if we're going to have an oversight of how things are going, I know that the keen individual that you've got in, great, is moving forward with things. Would it be possible in the data to have, if you want, a kind of action plan on which of the various methodologies you're going to use, you're going to focus on? You revealed to us, for example, that this is a key issue. You mentioned one that you were going to do. But if we could have a kind of table on, here are the options that we've got, this is the priority we're giving to these options, and here's our action plan, then we're able to have a look at how you're performing against your own standards, basically.
Wendy, Paul, are you able to take that, please?
Yes, that sounds quite reasonable. That's obviously when we're looking at the empty homes strategy again. I think it's due for renewal fairly soon. We'll be looking at absolutely at an action plan and how we're going to tackle these long-term empties.
Thank you. Councillor Shires?
Thank you, and thank you very much for your report. I've got 3 questions. One's regarding my ward, but also 2 are borough-wide. You might not have the answers, and that's fine for you to get back to us on that. So with regards empty homes, in Camp Hill there are quite a few empty, derelict houses at the moment, and I'm just wondering what the plan is for them. There are some that have been burnt out and, you know, vandalised, so it's finding out what's going to happen to them. And also, how many empty council properties do we have across the borough, and how many commercial properties do we have empty across the borough? Thank you very much.
Wendy, Paul? I think Councillor Shires is referring to properties in the housing stock in Camp Hill rather than private sector.
Right, okay.
So perhaps if Jane, you've taken a note of this, haven't you? And yeah.
Again, as Councillor Golby knows, I check this on a weekly basis. We don't have enough empties, unfortunately, to meet our demand. We've only got 77 voids in a stock of just under 6,000, and 37 of those are independent living schemes. So our churn, and this is something I'll be talking about later, the churn within our stock is at an all-time low. And we need that churn to be able to move people in that are sitting on our waiting lists or in temporary accommodation. So our numbers of empties are very, very low. Our voids are, when you look at benchmarking with other local authorities, we're very good on voids. But it's a thin edge, it's a twin-edged sword, because we actually need the churn. So yeah, we don't have many.
And I suppose when somebody leaves a property from our housing stock, it automatically becomes a void as part of the handover process. So you're always going to have a figure of some sort,
oh, yes,
aren't you?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Any further questions, Councillor Beetham?
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. So, first of all, I believe a figure was thrown out by Councillor Condacourt earlier about only needing 400 houses per year. I believe the most recent evidence to come from the Housing Economic Development Needs Assessment, which is evidence-based, gives around 649. So a bit of a difference there. But put that to a side, I was going to wonder, is it possible to get a briefing note of some sort to see where the long-term empties, as they are in each ward? So a ward breakdown, if possible.
Yes, I think that will be possible. Wendy, would you maybe within a fortnight be able to provide that briefing note to the committee?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it'd be something that I'd like to look at as well, actually, yes.
Yeah, so if we can have a ward-by-ward breakdown, that would be great. Yeah?
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. And just one more thing. It's mentioned that with the loans are for 300 odd thousand, etc. I was wondering if we could have just a note or email just to say how many loans have actually been taken from that, and if possible, the average of each loan, so we can see if people are taking the full whack, if they're taking 3,000 on average, of course. But thank you.
Right, okay.
Any further questions on this report? Councillor Wright.
Okay, first of all, just a clarification. On page 22, I'm assuming that should read 384,000 and that the extra zero is a misprint.
Oh, sorry. Is this in relation to the loans?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, under 7.2 loans.
4 zeros
yes.
rather than
Yeah,
3.
yeah.
So I'm assuming that's a misprint, but just to clarify that.
With the £384,054.89, no, that's the correct figure, but it's since 2014.
Yeah, I was querying in the paragraph above where it says 384 and then 4 zeros. So just to clarify.
Oh, right. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I've just rounded it up somehow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, an extra zero does make a big difference. Okay. But on the same page where it says under the proposal, councils will be able to charge higher council tax on empty properties. Are there any plans to do so?
I believe that legislation is being discussed in Parliament.
But assuming it does pass, are there plans for NBC to do that?
I think that would be hard to forecast because the bill obviously hasn't even passed its second reading in Parliament. So we're probably talking about at least 18 months. By which time it depends where we are with the budget assessing process. But I'm happy as chair to pass your suggestion on to the cabinet member of finance, and yes, we will have a look at that certainly. Any further questions? No. Okay, right. In which case we're going to go on to the next item, which is plans for tree planting on Borough Council land and as part of planning conditions. And I'm somewhat surprised because I thought it was Councillor Kondaka who wanted this item on the OSP agenda. So, but David, would you like to present your report, please?
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've prepared this report as a means of updating the panel with where we are in relation to our current position with regards to trees across the borough and our current thinking and where we're looking to take forwards. So the report gives I give a brief definition because you will hear interchanged often in correspondence the term silviculture as opposed to arboriculture. I've provided a link for members to follow so that you can see our current tree policy, which outlines our approach to managing our tree stock across the borough. And I've also provided a further link to the supplementary planning documents that our team prepared that have been adopted now as a part of the appendage to the local plan. Going to 4.3, it outlines what our current position is. In terms of tree removals, I've spoken in terms of what data we hold currently. Clearly, I would want to see that change. This is where we are now as opposed to where I want us to be. So we've talked about we don't discriminate between trees in woodland areas or tenanted gardens and housing sites, open spaces or green spaces or cemeteries. So it talks about what data we currently hold. One caveat that I did put on that, obviously, that it says there the data does not determine if removed trees were healthy. I would just caveat that by saying that our current tree policy is that we do not routinely fell healthy trees. We're a parks department, we like trees, so we don't tend to fell them unless there's something wrong with them. In terms of the numbers removed, item 4.4, I refer to the numbers that we've had over the last sort of 3 years. And then in 4.5, I give some details relating to trees that we have subsequently planted. You'll note that we did no tree planting during 2020, 2021. Obviously, we were doing a lockdown period, and our focus was elsewhere. It was not a priority at that time. Moving forward, looking to the future, obviously working with our tree officer and our green space planning officer, Matt Crossley, we are now working with our consultants who are currently working on the green space strategy, and that has a series of strands attached to it. So we are currently, as well as that, we're preparing a tree strategy, which the council does not currently have, alongside other strategies that will sit as if you like, the green space strategy will be an umbrella document with a series of other policies underneath it. That sets out our foundation, if you like, for us to then build on later with a series of policy documents to follow. And what I've given is an indication of the areas that we are currently considering as a part of the preparation of that strategy. So I've provided them as bullet points in terms of looking at, obviously, our primary objectives. So we're looking at safety, visual amenity and aesthetic quality, environmental and ecological value, our strategic aims. I think the most fundamental point that I would want the panel to consider is that we are looking to resolve conflicts with trees and habitation. And our approach that we're adopting is right tree, right place. My tree officer provided me prior to this, and I wasn't able to include it in the report, with a significant number of photographs of trees that have previously been planted across the borough that we are now finding are in an inappropriate location. We have trees adjacent to properties, trees adjacent to industrial areas, key infrastructure such as railways and so on and so forth, where we are now having to look seriously at removing those, and that comes with considerable cost. We are looking to manage that going forwards. It's a legacy issue. We will work our way through that. But going forwards, we need to ensure that we don't repeat that, that we choose the right locations, and we will be looking at our available public open space and what availability there is within it to accommodate further tree planting in the future. All I would say is that having initially looked at areas of constraint, if you like, if you allow for proximity to adjacent properties, to our public open spaces or existing assets that we already have within those sites, be it sports facilities, for example, the actual available area of land that we currently control that may be available for tree planting is relatively limited. And we might need to consider other alternatives, be that, looking to private landowners as a means of looking at that. I know the government is currently obviously very keen on looking at increasing our tree stock across the whole of the UK. So that gives you a brief overview, and then I was hoping that you would take questions, and I would take questions from there.
Thank you. I do have a public speaker, which is Councillor Kandaka, but obviously he's not present. So I'll kick things off. First of all, HS2, are they giving us money for trees as part of their whole biodiversity offsetting? Because I believe that we do fall within the radius of HS2. I don't know if I'm happy for Councillor Gutteridge to come in if you've... I've got some more. So I'll, the other one I wanted to ask was, obviously we're sort of finding out, 15 to 20 years into a tree's lifespan, that obviously it comes with a number of problems. Now, I'm not a specialist on trees in any way. I'm not a biologist. But I wanted to know, are there specific species of trees which become less complicated 20 years down the line?
First point first, in relation to HS2, whilst I don't know specifically, it would be if they've got development that's taking place within our borough boundary, which I confess I'm not aware of.
They say within 20 miles.
Then that no doubt would come through the planning process, and that would be picked up in due course by colleagues. So I'm not aware of that myself at this moment in time. In terms of tree species and tree longevity, 20 years is young for a tree. I will often, you'll see me give a wry smile when people talk about long-term plans and talk in terms of 10 years, 20 years. For us, an oak tree will not reach maturity until it's over 100 years of age, and then will have a useful working life of somewhere between 500 and 750 years before we'd need to look at possibly removing it. So it's intergenerational. We will plant trees in our parks that we will never see reach maturity, and they will be for our great grandchildren and beyond. There are also trees that we will see in our parks that more typically you would find in a domestic property. I personally would favour that parkland trees belong in parklands, and that we should look to those as we move forward. So there are species that we can use. There are species that we would seek to avoid, that we know may have a propensity towards defects. Although we may use them if it's of a particular significance, but we'll choose the location. It's back to this right tree, right place. So there is a range of trees. At the other end of the spectrum, silver birch, to us we consider a short-lived tree. Reach maturity at about 40 and probably coming to the end of its days at 80, 90 years of age. They're also a pioneering species. We will sometimes put those in woodland settings, although we're not familiar with that here. But where I previously worked at East Staffs, obviously we had the National Forest in there. We would use some species of trees as pioneers. They would be there to perfect the main tree planting, to allow it to develop, and then in due course we would remove those. Most typically they will go for firewood. That is generally that most timber would be used for following that. Our current tree stock is somewhat difficult, although we have a number of areas that you might consider to be copse-like. It's not. We don't have full-size forests. We don't very small wooded areas. More typically, what we see is individual trees or groups of trees throughout public open spaces, and within some of our housing stock as well. And it's those that we will look to manage. Like you say, there are some that we come across where their location is not ideal. We can manage those in terms of, we don't necessarily need to remove them immediately, but we will look to develop management strategies for those.
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Beetham?
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm glad to see there is a more longer-term view on more, as it said, more silviculture than arboriculture, however you pronounce that, I'm afraid. But one thing, when becoming councillor, I never expected that one of my main complaints would have been trees. Of nearly, probably at least once a week, a tree is in my inbox of some description or another, mostly lime trees, but that's a different story. So to see that we're looking at putting right trees in right places, for me, is one of those things which is fundamental within the future strategy, which I believe is coming with the green space, open green space and parks, or that. So my question is, because I'm slightly concerned that we don't have a complete list of all trees or groups of trees that we own, do we, to my knowledge? Is it going to be part of the green space strategy to correlate a list of trees and either individually or tree groupings, so that we can basically see what we owe when they're coming to their, as you said, end of life? Because I'm aware through conversations I've had with you and Councillor Gutteridge about some trees in Kingswood which will go towards the end of, are coming to the end of their life, and we need to look for the next few years about planting some so that when they do come to the end of their life, we're not just planting saplings straight away, which then, of course, can deteriorate or be subject to vandalism, which we've seen in the past. So if you could answer about the list, that'd be perfect.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of tree numbers, we currently have an estimate. We estimate that we currently have somewhere in the region of 120,000 trees across the borough on our land. That is a very crude figure. I would treat it with a degree of caution. The current strategy and the time that we have available to develop is in order for us to catalogue all of those, I think we would be unlikely to achieve that. What we are tending to focus more on is, in terms of the green space strategy, is obviously refining our hierarchy of sites, and then looking within those, having developed that hierarchy and with the strategy in place, is similar to the work that we did initially with Riversley Park and the Mine's Wealth Belt and we're currently working on with Whittleford, developing a concept plan for those sites and then following that up with a management plan for going forward. That will then allow us to identify those. Whether we will ever get to the level of quantifying down to the individual level, that would depend a lot on the availability of the resources that we have. We currently have one tree officer. There has been a number of periods in my time here, and I've been here since 2006, where we've had no tree officer for a number of years. And consequently, you tend to focus on complaints or instances where we've been informed where we have something that's dangerous. So our focus tends to be towards removing trees that are in a dangerous condition. There is also regularly a misconception, if you like, that we look after all trees, and quite clearly we do not. There are a number that are on private dwellings, but we also have our colleagues at the County Council who have and retain responsibility for all trees on their land. So they have their own forestry team that we liaise with. But whilst we have an agency arrangement with them and we currently undertake the grounds maintenance in terms of grass cutting, etc., trees do not fall within that. So we don't actually maintain any trees that are not on MBBC land. So I hope that clarifies those points for you. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Wright?
Yeah, thanks. In previous years, I've noticed that newly planted trees have been dying because they haven't been watered during periods of drought. Is there now a policy in place to prevent that happening?
Obviously our tree planting season, because predominantly we would plant trees bare root or root ball stock as opposed to containerised stock, would be planted during the winter planting season, so typically between November and probably getting into early March, but depending on how the year and the winter has gone, that can be curtailed somewhat. You increasingly will be seeing your own vegetation starting to bud up earlier in the year now. That is done because normally we would expect the tree to have established itself. Given the volume that we have and where we may be planting those, it is not always practicable for us to be able to subsequently arrange for those to be watered. Essentially they are planted and they have to fend for themselves. There are instances where we will plant containerised stock, or we have particularly significant trees where we will make that decision. Usually, typically where we have them in and around buildings, such as, we've recently planted some by the side of the town hall, where we would arrange for that. But a lot of our tree planting tends to be we tend to focus more on whip planting, which is obviously far smaller, 1+1 transplants, as opposed to what people might consider you may see from a garden centre, such as a standard tree. Again, it's for the same purpose. They establish a lot quicker. Usually after a decade, you would struggle to determine the difference between that and a standard tree, because they adapt more readily to their surroundings and will grow, therefore, a lot faster. And unfortunately, because of the rate of attrition, we are working in the public realm. The reason that local authorities tend to plant at a rate of 4 or 5 plants a metre is because we accept we're probably only going to get 2 out of those 5 that will actually reach maturity because of vandalism, which I don't like, but that is in order for us to be able to achieve a viable scheme.
Do you have a target of planting, say, X new trees for every mature tree that is felled?
No, is a simple answer. Our approach is right tree, right place, rather than a particular number. Clearly, we would like to look. I've heard mention you should plant a tree for every one that you remove. But if we're removing a tree that is in the wrong location, then it's unlikely that we would plant one there again. We may look to plant one somewhere else, but those would come as a part of our development plans that we will be, and they wouldn't necessarily correlate with that. We're trying to develop a data set that will allow us to have a better understanding of how many have been removed. And in putting this report together, it was interesting comparing the data, is that allowing for 2020, which was an exceptional year, the number that we are currently replanting almost correlates. I think there was a difference of about 40. We planted perhaps 40 less trees than we'd removed over that same period. And that's probably as a reflection of trees that we've had to remove because of their location. And trying to ensure that we don't repeat that experience.
Yeah, right. Surely, if you're only expecting less than half of those trees to survive, then surely you should be aiming to plant more trees than are being removed, not fewer.
Yeah, I mean, I accept your point in that regard. However, as I alluded to, is actually when you look at our overall current land holdings and the availability within those, it is relatively limited. And what we're trying to look at is look at each space in a strategic way in terms of what do we want it to realise, and understand from that what capacity it would have to accommodate trees, rather than necessarily being tied to a specific number, a target of X number of trees. It's more a case of ensuring that we plant the right amount of trees in the right locations, in the right site. That's our current thinking. We are obviously awaiting some more information that will come through as a part of the development of the tree policy, and I am sure it will evolve over that period, and we will need to wait and see what comes from that. And again, I would expect that we would come to scrutiny with that as a draft report for further consideration.
Absolutely. We would want that coming back to the OSP. I think I'm going to bring this item to a close. I think we've given this one more than enough time. So we'll now move to item number 11, which is the Integrated Performance Report for the fourth quarter 2021 and 2022. We have a number of officers here who are going to address some parts of the report. We've got Stephen Gore, who is from you're our Risk Management and Performance Officer at the Council, and we've also got Jane Grant from our Housing Department as well. Stephen, I just thought it'd be useful because obviously there's some new members of the committee here. Would you just be able to take us through the purpose of integrated performance reports and basically where councillors can come in and seek to influence them, please?
Yeah, that was my intention, Chair, just to run through what's included in the report as well as do the summary for the quarter. So I'll go ahead with that now. So I'm Steve Gore, Risk Management and Performance Officer. One of my roles... Sorry, can you hear?
We can't hear you very well. I'm just asking our technical officer to turn you up a bit.
Okay.
If possible, just hold fire for 10 seconds. We can hear you. It could just be a bit slightly louder, I think.
Okay.
I'll give you the heads up when we're ready to go.
Right.
If not, we'll just have to.
Do you want me to shout?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, right. Okay, Stephen, try now.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes, go on, Stephen, carry on.
Okay. I'm Steve Gore, Risk Management and Performance Officer. One of my roles is to pull together information for corporate performance reports. In relation to the report that comes to this panel, before I summarise the latest quarter information, I'd like to run through what information is included. So the original report comprised of just the three appendices that you see, A, B and C. I think I should firstly mention that you will see performance with and without targets. That's because traditionally performance always has targets. Performance indicators always have targets. But a number of our service areas have undergone what are called lean system reviews or process efficiency reviews. And the philosophy of lean system is not to have targets, rather to concentrate on improvement. So where you see no targets, it just means that that service area has undergone a lean system review. Appendix A links finance cost areas to specific performance within the remit of the panel, and that information only comes to this panel. Appendix B relates to the strategic risk register, which I review quarterly with the management team individually and collectively. That's because risks are owned individually by directors or collectively by management team as a group. Once that has been undertaken, I then update the status of the document and the document itself. Appendix B shows the status summary, followed by a full copy of the latest version of the document, dated for document control purposes. In terms of the status, this relates to the number of risks that are satisfactorily managed. That is, the number of risks that are net green or net amber. Net meaning given the mitigations that have been put in place. The overall figure is shown as a percentage, so the greens and ambers are totaled up and expressed as a percentage of the total, and the target is 80%. When I provide the summary shortly, I'll also give a verbal update of the key changes. There aren't too many key changes to the document that have happened this time. Appendix C shows the executive summary to the strategic performance report, and this report is reviewed monthly by management team and quarterly by cabinet. It consists of 19 indicators and measures under 4 headings: finance, people and service delivery, processes, and improvement. The executive summary itself shows positive aspects, overperformance, and areas for improvement, underperformance. Where any of the 19 indicators are not shown, it just means that they're on target. When I'm pulling all the information together, I liaise with managers to get as much information for the panel to understand what performance issues there are. However, the panel does have the option to invite a manager via the chair. On that note, I'd like to make a request to the panel that when you receive the report, which is normally 2 weeks prior to the meeting, if you could at your earliest opportunity, review the information and decide whether you need a manager to attend. If you do, could you contact the chair as soon as possible? This will allow plenty of time for the committee officers to arrange for a manager or appropriate deputy to be at the meeting. The reason I'm making the request is because I don't have the detailed knowledge of the service areas to answer specific performance questions. My role is to pull all the information together. Appendices D and E have been added at the request of a previous panel. Appendix D relates to freedom of information requests and environmental requests outside of their designated timescales of 20 days. These are anonymised, so there are no personal details, just details of the requests. Similarly, Appendix E shows complaints outside of their designated timescale of 10 days. Again, no personal details are included. There is one other piece of information that's contained in the initial narrative to the report, and that relates to covert surveillance. That was added following an external inspection report that highlighted that it would be good practice, quotes, to keep members informed of any activity or inactivity in relation to covert surveillance that may be being undertaken. There hasn't been any, and our legal section advised that there is very likely to be any, but I do still ask the question each quarter. So moving on to the actual summary for this quarter. Sorry, Chair, do you want to come in?
No, carry on, Steve.
No, yeah, okay. I was going to just do the actual summary for this quarter, which relates to the end of March, 4th quarter. So Appendix A, the first thing I should say is the latest finance information relates to the 3rd quarter. This is due to the finance department having issues with staff turnover and recruitment. So the Appendix A, of the 7 performance indicators, 2 have improved, 3 declined, 1 stayed the same, and 1 has no trend. And the decline measures are parks contract monitoring, processing of private sector disabled facility grants, and removal of private sector property hazards. As regards the strategic risk register, the 4th quarter breakdown showed that the net risk is net red 3, net amber 4, net green 12. So therefore 16 are deemed as satisfactorily managed, or 84%. The net red risks are R1, accommodation needs, R4, economic vibrancy, and R20, the pandemic. The key changes this quarter are R1, accommodation needs, was updated for information on the town centre strategy and development of the supplementary planning document. R6, arson, accidental fire, a planned action has been added relating to fire and carbon monoxide detection systems. R7, breakdown of council services, 2 planned actions have been added regarding the introduction of a business continuity planning policy and the appointment of a head of people and culture to lead on emergency planning. R8, failure to deliver the key elements of the corporate plan, reference has been added to building a better borough, replacing the delivering our future document as the corporate plan. And R16, cyber security, planned action has been added relating to a cyber security peer review. Appendix C shows that of the 19 measures, 11 are green, none are amber, and 8 are red. The red measures are working days lost to sickness short-term sickness absence, working days lost to long-term sickness absence, short-term return to work interview compliance within 3 days, agency staff spend, delivering our future monitoring assessment, health and safety monitoring assessment, and annual development reviews completed. Appendix D, the Freedom of Information and Environmental Information requests. I should say that environmental information requests, for anyone who's not aware, are a statutory obligation on the council to provide any information it holds on the environment. So the summary for FOI and EIRs are 618 were received, 617 were completed, 132 were late, and 1 was outstanding. And finally, complaint summary, Appendix E, 1,021 were received, 1,015 were completed, 319 were late, and 6 were outstanding. I should say that if you look at the table in Appendix A on page 1, there's a transposition error that reads 1115 and it should be 1015. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And before I take questions on this report, Jane Grant has very kindly offered to come to the committee to explain some of the parts of the housing department within this report, which come across as a bad face on the trend, but I do believe there are fairly legitimate reasons as to why that is the case. So, Jane, thank you very much for coming and staying to the very end. Do you want to just make some of the comments that you wanted to make to the committee?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I've come along really tonight to try and explain to members why potential failure to adequately provide accommodation for people in our borough and meet their needs is a red and is a significant risk. Obviously, I think you'd all agree that, you know, somewhere to live that's affordable, warm, safe, secure is something that we all probably take for granted and perhaps don't realise how many people actually don't have that. And in our borough, we have significant housing needs. So the reason it's red is because of some of those challenges that we're facing as a local council. And I just really wanted to give you a flavour of some of those challenges so that you will probably know about them but may not have realised that they have a direct impact on our ability to meet demand. So obvious things like we're an ageing population. So over the last 30 years in our society, we're growing older, we're living longer, we're living more independently, we're staying in our homes. Years ago, you would probably leave a home at the age of 7, you know, you might die at 70. We've got people living in their homes well into their 90s now, quite happily, with support. So those properties are not coming back into the market. That has a direct impact because families are not able to buy those properties. We have a growth in single-person households. So relationship breakdowns, single people choosing to live on their own is, you know, a phenomenon that's appeared really over the last 20 years or so. So again, that aggravates the need for housing. Some of these things are obviously completely out of our, we're not able to really mitigate against those. But some of the issues that we have locally that mean Nuneaton and Bedworth struggles probably compared to other districts and boroughs are things like we have the highest number of young people in care in Warwickshire. So when young people in care leave care at 18, there is a statutory responsibility on the local authority to house those people. So we're already, you know, we have that forecast, we know the numbers that are coming, and it's higher than the other districts and boroughs. We also have the highest levels of domestic abuse in the county. And certainly over the last 2 years and during the pandemic, that escalated and is still far too high. And obviously you'll appreciate that, you know, people that are victims of domestic abuse are a priority for rehousing. We have currently just under 3,000 people on our waiting list. Every single applicant has a housing need. We don't put anyone on the list that doesn't need housing, and it may be something as minor as lacking one bedroom, but they would go on the list and they'd be in a low band. Our two highest bands, Band 1 Plus and Band 1, are people that are in significant housing needs, so homeless families, of which we've currently got 120 in temporary accommodation. So that's hostels, our self-contained temporary accommodation, hotels, etc. That is an unprecedented figure. I've worked here all my working life, and other than the pandemic, I've never known figures like that for homeless people. That is partly compounded by, as I mentioned earlier, the social housing churn has reduced, people aren't moving. 40 years ago, we had 11,000 council properties. We've now got less than 6,000 because of the right to buy. The government has now announced that it's extending the right to buy to housing association tenants. So we're anticipating that we will lose some of those properties within our borough as well. Initiatives like First Homes, which is a government initiative to help people that can't afford a full market value property but can afford a property at 30% below market value, which is brilliant, but unfortunately it forms part of the 25% Section 106 affordable quota, which means that we will lose our affordable rented units that we get currently on the estates where properties are built. So as much as housing associations are building, we're building, we've got a building programme, because the demand for housing keeps increasing, we're never matching, supply just isn't matching demand. The private rented sector, again, really has grown hugely over the last probably 10 years. The last 3 years, it's now a major part, it's a major route for people to get into housing where they can't buy and don't qualify for council housing. However, and we work very closely with private landlords, we know that today, any property that goes on the market for rent in Nuneaton and Bedworth, you've got about 70 people going after it. Estate agents are telling us that, they've got people gazumping each other, they've got people offering 6 months rent in advance, they've got people offering to pay more rent. And the client group that this council is trying to help, that are approaching us for council housing, are not likely to qualify for private rent because they need guarantors, they need bonds, which we can help with, but private landlords don't charge local housing allowance rates. They want market rent, and that's unaffordable to most of the people on our waiting list. So things like that continue to impact on the challenges that we have to keep coming up with initiatives to try and help. And then homelessness itself has increased in terms of domestic violence, obviously I've just mentioned, but also family breakdown and assured short-hold tenancy ends. So private landlords that are coming out of the market are serving Section 21s, although they're going to be changing shortly, but a lot of our landlords have decided they don't want to rent anymore, and so they're serving notice, and those families have nowhere else to go. So it is quite unprecedented times at the moment in terms of us being able to meet that demand. And so that's why it is a red, because it's something we have to be constantly on top of and constantly trying to think of other initiatives. The empty homes, presentation that you heard tonight, there might be some options there that we can consider to try and alleviate the pressure on temporary accommodation. And then other things that happen nationally that will just be a bit of a curveball into the challenges that we already have will also impact on our ability to meet local demand. Things like Homes for Ukraine, refugee resettlement schemes, they don't impact on social housing, but they impact in terms of the private rented sector. So all of these little things that come along unexpectedly are continuing to give us a bit of a headache, and it's the reason that you know, we're not currently meeting that demand, and I'm not sure that there's any local authority in the land that is. But we continue to sort of be on top of it, be talking to each other, neighbouring districts and boroughs, and trying to come up with new initiatives and try and, you know, alleviate the pressure on the Borough Council. But it's a partnership attempt as well. We work very closely with county council colleagues to do with care leavers. We have done some really good initiatives. The house project that helps care leavers was launched in Nuneaton and Bedworth 4 years ago. So we were the first to roll that out, and the council allocates 3 one-bedroom flats on a rolling basis. So that mitigates some of those pressures for care leavers. And we do like to try and look at new initiatives and lead the way in that in the county, and we're good at doing that at this council. So I think I just wanted to sort of throw out a few of the challenges that we have, so that there's an understanding of the reasons that it's actually so hard to meet housing demand, which I'm sure you're probably all aware of, but there are things that maybe you weren't. I don't know whether you've got any questions.
Well, Jane, thank you for coming and outlining the issues that we are facing, but certainly not specific to Nuneaton and Bedworth. These are national problems. I think we are doing what we can. We have a modular housing scheme that, although is experiencing some supply chain problems, I know that we're working flat out on that. I think the answer is build on our brownfield sites. And I know that we've got a programme in place to do that. But I accept we are in an unprecedented situation, and I think the government was absolutely right to introduce the Homes for Ukraine scheme and the Afghan resettlement scheme. But of course, that does have a knock-on impact on private sector housing in Nuneaton and Bedworth. But I think that absolutely outlines why that trend does show up, why it does in the report. And thank you for providing that clarity to us. Are there any questions to Jane on that specifically? Councillor Beetham? Anything specifically on the housing issues? No? Okay. Well, we'll go to the report more generally. Councillor Beetham? On a point of order, Councillor Kenner?
Thank you, Joe. Just as a precaution, can I propose that we suspend the relevant standing orders to allow us to go to the continuation of business, considering we've only got 15 minutes left to the allotted time? Thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Kenner has moved that we suspend standing orders. That's seconded by Councillor Beetham. As it's a procedural motion, it has to go straight to a vote. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. So suspending orders. We have suspended standing orders. So Councillor Beetham.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. So just in regards to the trend indicator on page 60, I believe, for the performance and the satisfaction of capital works programme, it's indicated as a neutral, but with those brilliant kind of feedback, I would have presumed that would be more of a positive thing. So I was just wondering if that is a mistake, or if you truly believe it's a more neutral term, because again, judging by what we've got in front of us, I'd imagine that to be quite a good statistic. And I'll let you answer that one first, and I've got a second one.
Yeah, I did notice that myself in the report. I mean, we missed off 3 out of nearly 15,000. I mean, I would expect that to be one of the better ones. I think that might be a mistake. Stephen, do you know? Are you able to just get back to us on that?
Yeah, it's not a mistake at all. It's the fact that we're brilliant now, and we were brilliant last year as well. So it's the trend compared to last year.
Oh, so it basically shows that we haven't made any improvement, although it's still good.
Well, although it's virtually impossible to do so,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, that's fine. Any further points on Councillor Beetham?
And just a second point. I wondered if it'd be possible to get a report to this committee about complaints for the last quarter, just so that we can have a overview and more of a summary of what the main complaints are relating to, if that makes sense, if that gets anyone's interest.
I think that comes at our next meeting, doesn't it? Because this is from the fourth quarter of the last municipal year. Stephen?
Yeah, so there is a breakdown of the complaints in terms of those out of timescale, but I'm sure if you want a more detailed one, that could be arranged.
Councillor Cape.
Yeah, thanks for the advice to raise any questions 2 weeks or so in advance. I did read through, or attempt to read through, most of the report. And one of my observations was that the graph on page 47, the very first diagram, which shows outruns, if you carry the trend on down, it would result in an overspend in Q4. Is that correct? The second observation, and perhaps to help for the future, is that in lots of sections of the reports, on one hand, there's mentions of savings on salaries, which for me is a false saving, because elsewhere there's mention of consultancy fees, etc., or agency fees. Would it be possible to have a simple diagram that shows salary that was expected to be given out to officers for positions that are vacant, and money spent on agency fees correlated across, so we can actually see what it's actually costing us to hire staff as opposed to have full positions, and that perhaps that needs to be carried forward to the employment committee.
Stephen, are you able to answer that?
Well, I'm able to give an answer, but as I said, my role is to pull all the information together that's given to me. But I can go back to the finance people. The reason I made the request to the panel is, and I accept because of the turnover of panel and new membership, etc., and new elected members even, is the fact that traditionally I've been coming to the meetings, giving the information out, and then I'm going away with the questions from the panel to ask those managers to come back with answers at a later date. So hopefully we can turn that round, but I can go back to those managers and make that request if that's what you want me to do.
Yes, if you could do that, Stephen, that would be great.
Okay,
Councillor Kenner?
Thank you, Chair. So my question's just about freedom of information requests. It's probably a question asked now, but I think the answer might best be suited if it's sent out to all members of scrutiny committees, to all three, because it appears in the quarterly reports for all of them, I believe. About freedom of information, if we can differentiate between, or at least even just have a briefing note on freedom of information requests made by members of the public and freedom of information requests made by councillors acting in their capacities as a councillor, to find out how many freedom of information requests councillors are submitting themselves. Thank you, Chair.
Yes. If you could find out if we're allowed to do that, Stephen, that would be
yeah,
good.
So the request is how many are made by the public and how many councillors make.
Yeah. That'd be great. Any further points? No. Okay. Well, I think we're happy to. Are we happy to note that report? Yeah. Okay. In agreement there. That's good. So next item is the forward plan. That's on page 162, and that is just for information. It's just the cabinet's priorities over the next few months. Does any member wish to speak on that item? No. Okay. Item number 13 is the draft work programme for 2022-2023. The draft is on page 168. There is an item that I would like to add to the work programme, and if I could ask our clerk to hand out the work suggestion form. It's with respect to antisocial behaviour and the impact that is having on our housing department. We have seen a number of incidents in on social media and in the Nuneaton news of a limited number of tenants who are causing antisocial behaviour, and that is obviously having not just a social impact on our other tenants, but also financially on the housing department. So you can see the suggestion as printed above. I'm happy to propose this. Does this receive a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kenner. Does any member wish to speak on this programme suggestion? No. Well, I'll put this to a vote then to approve. All those in favour, please show. Against? Abstentions? I think that's carried. Thank you. So with this addition to the work programme, there is just one slight amendment that I'd like to make, and it's with respect to autism assessments. We've got it penciled in for the 22nd of February 2023, but given that this is quite a substantial issue in the borough, I'd like to try and bring that forward. So, Maria, could I ask, would you be able to speak with Kevin Hollis and see if we can bring that actually to the next meeting, if possible, please? So with that amendment, the work programme is printed. I'm happy to propose that work programme. Does that receive a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Harbison. Are there any other additions, maybe? I don't know. Any members should speak? No? Okay. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. We now come to item number 14, which is any other items. I do have a public speaker, and that is Councillor Kandaka, but he has left the meeting. I have one item, and that is just to thank Councillor Joy Coventry-Morton, who attended the Warwickshire County Council Adult Social Care Committee on my behalf yesterday. I had a work engagement that I can get out of. Are there any further items under AOB? Councillor Beetham?
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. It's just in regards to a tweet that a councillor has recently sent out just during this meeting. Just to bring some clarification, it's in regards to the conversation we had earlier about 196, 198 Church Road. And in it, it stated that that the costs are high and there's a cut to a number of rooms. But I'd just like to clarify from what we heard from Councillor Golby earlier that the reason for the decrease in rooms is because we were advised by planning, and we don't want to get into a situation like Medway Council where they're being advised to reject a Medway Council planning application about putting solar panels on the Medway Council property. So I just wanted that on the record. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Beetham. And I think it's important that we actually come out and acknowledge those mistruths. Councillor Golby?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make a statement I am entitled to as the portfolio holder with your discretion, which you just obviously granted. But yeah, I was made aware of the fact that Councillor Kandaka actually tweeted before he left the room that after 4 months we'd finally found out the expected conversion costs of the £635,000 196 to 198 Church Road, Stockingford, will be 650 to 700k, big cuts to number of rooms. Now, I don't know which part of we were advised by our own planning team to reassess what we'd put forward he actually missed. And this is exactly why this sort of thing needs calling out, because there's no context to what he's telling our residents. The context was made very clear that had we not amended the original plan, it wouldn't have got through planning, so we would have had no rooms available at this property because we wouldn't have been able to convert it. So what does this man actually need to hear before he starts telling people the truth? I don't know. And I'm not sure anybody else in this room can tell us. I'm not sure whether one of his colleagues can tell us, because honestly, this is beyond ridiculous. The constant officers are spending a lot of time constantly having to counteract things like this, and it's detracting from the job that they are actually supposed to be doing. And it's ridiculous, because next week he'll be moaning that we can't employ people, and it's probably because he's putting on about how poor the council is. Well, it all adds up. It's all circular, and he really, really does need to wind his neck in. Honestly, man's a cockalorum.
Well, look, as chair of the committee, I take on. I genuinely can't see what the issue is with this property on Church Road. From what I can see, the council is providing accommodation for potentially homeless people. When you look at the finances behind the project, we're going to basically get back our money within 4 to 5 years. It's normally about 50 years. I don't genuinely see the problem. And personally, as you know, if any member of the committee wants to take this forward, as chair, I'm probably going to have to rule it out of order, because I genuinely don't know what more information our officers can give. And also, I just think it's a waste of their time, when actually I'd much rather them be spending their time actually trying to identify properties in the borough that we can use for people who are legitimately homeless. But I mean, Councillor Beetham is right. I don't want to be in a position that Medway Council were in yesterday, where the recommendation on the report that has become a sort of Twitter sensation is that Medway Council planning applications committee is recommended by Medway Council to object to the application submitted by Medway Council. That's local government in 21st century Britain for you. And on that note, I don't think there's any more comments under AOB. So, Councillor Cape.
Coming new to the whole situation of 196 and 198, and the background to it being explained to me for the first time this evening, that if that tweet is correct, it's a misrepresentation of what I heard, because I fully understood the point that was made by others, and I would also support that such tweets should be sanctioned.
My response to your point is I agree. I don't agree with Councillor Kandaka's tweet. I have been made aware of it. I don't believe it's true or factual, and I know that the council will go out of its way to try and correct the record. But I don't know why council officers need to keep on doing it. At the end of the day, it's a waste of their time. It really is. It is genuinely a waste of taxpayers' money. And, you know, if the said individual is listening back home, I just ask him, it's not the first time. And when the said individual complains about staff who are leaving the authority, I wonder why. And on that note, I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.